Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this workshop titled Disrupting Assumptions, Forging Interdisciplinary Archival Engagement. My name is Sandy Enriquez, and I am the Southern California co-chair for the Education Committee of the Society of California Archivists. I'd like to start off with a bit of housekeeping. As a reminder, we are using Zoom webinar today, so attendees will not be able to unmute or share a camera. However, we do highly encourage you to use the chat and the Q&A buttons. You'll notice that there is a Zoom control panel at the bottom of your screen. If you select live transcript, you'll be able to access closed captioning for today's presentation. Some other important settings that you'll find are the audio settings on the left-hand side and a Q&A button on the right-hand side of that bar. We highly encourage you to use the Q&A button to submit your questions. As you can see, you can also upvote questions that other audience members have submitted, as well as type in your own questions and even have the option to send those questions anonymously. We are also implementing intentional Q&A guidelines for today's presentation. These guidelines are adopted from recommendations provided by Dr. Eve Tuck, an Associate Professor of Critical Race and Indigenous Studies at the University of Toronto. We ask that you peer review your question before asking it and that you consider the following. Is this question really a question? Does posing and answering this question in front of everyone benefit the group, or would it be more appropriate to ask the presenter one-on-one? And could I do my own research to find out the answer to this question? Please note that we don't want to discourage you from asking questions. Rather, we want to create a supportive environment where we all reflect intentionally on our questions in order to facilitate a more successful discussion. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our two fabulous speakers for today, Julie Tanaka and Claudia Willett. Julie Tanaka was interim head of distinctive collections and curator of rare books and manuscripts at Arizona State University, and is now Director of Special Collections and College Archives at Occidental College. A native Californian, Julie is outward-facing, faculty and student-oriented, and passionate about teaching with primary sources across disciplines and at all levels of experience. She continues to pursue opportunities to collaborate with campus and community partners to develop and implement new ways of engaging students and faculty in special collections and archives. Claudia Willett was the Senator John S. McCain Papers Archivist at Arizona State University. As project manager for a multi-million-dollar grant, Claudia coordinated administrative requirements and oversaw appraisal, processing, preservation, description, and access work for the collection. In her new role as archivist at Stanford University, she continues pursuing collaborative opportunities with colleagues across broad areas of interest, including instruction development and implementation, outreach and engagement, sustainable and ethical collecting practices, access and privacy rights, and reappraisal and deaccessioning. Please join me in welcoming Julie and Claudia. I will now pass it on to them to begin their presentation.
So thank you everyone for joining us today. We're excited to have this conversation. As Sandy mentioned, we're really looking forward to this being conversational. We haven't solved the question of interdisciplinary engagement, so we're looking forward to the opportunity to speak with all of you and just share some of our insights on the work we've done. If you could move to the next slide. So we just wanted to take a moment, because this is a virtual event, to offer an acknowledgement from where we're both joining you from today. So I am at Stanford, and Stanford sits on the ancestral land of the Muwekme Ohlone tribe. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people. Consistent with our values of community and inclusion, we have a responsibility to acknowledge, honor, make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples.
Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Julie Tanaka. I'm joining you from Los Angeles at Occidental College. Occidental College occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Tongva people, The Tongva have been in Southern California for at least 10,000 years, and they are a significant part of the fabric of today's Los Angeles. Today, we honor the ancestors of this land, their lives, their legacies, and their descendants. In the spirit of honor and respect, let us also recognize the Native elders of this land, past, present, and emerging. Please join me for a moment of reflection on our own history, recognizing that we are here because of the sacrifices forced upon those Indigenous ancestors by genocide and settler colonialism.
Okay, here I am. Just to set some expectations, this is how we plan to talk about our topic today. And we will have time at the end for Q&A and discussion. So we won't be answering things throughout the webinar, but we will have dedicated time to it at the end. Next slide. So as with any great endeavor, we had to identify an intention for our interest in exploring interdisciplinary connections and relationships at ASU. So we were colleagues there together. That was the impetus for this whole webinar, and we are now at new institutions. So we've had to do a lot of interesting reflection. So that will definitely be reflected in this webinar too. But I will say we centered the idea that everyone should have opportunities to come see, engage, and explore our collections regardless of their area of study. In the wake of remote learning, especially, creating both virtual and in-person experiences that can meet students where they are seemed really important without applying undue pressure. We considered how this broad approach could challenge assumptions about the use or purpose of special collections in relationship to STEM and social sciences. In recognizing this, we realized that it would be helpful to anchor this engagement with complementary skills. This is when the multidisciplinary pathways started to evolve in our thinking as an essential way to connect common goals through different skills development. The application of primary source literacy specifically and archival literacy generally can serve as a great example of this. So primary source literacy, as we know, is the combination of knowledge, skills, and abilities necessary to effectively find, interpret, evaluate, and ethically use primary sources within specific disciplinary contexts in order to create new knowledge or to revise existing understandings. So this tenet is reflected in the WAYS requirement at Stanford. So grounding this in context, right? The ways of thinking, ways of doing is Stanford's unique general education breadth requirement. Students can create their own custom toolkit with a set of intellectual skills to use at Stanford and to take with them when they graduate. This includes applied quantitative reasoning, social inquiry, ethical reasoning, among others, offering courses such as ethics in bioengineering, intro to decision analysis, spies, lies, and algorithms, and data science. The premise in these areas is we make many decisions in life on the basis of large amounts of data, which can be incomplete or otherwise imperfect and fraught with uncertainties. Does this sound familiar? Next slide. But this is not to say that the humanities need to move into the shadow of our STEM compatriots in higher education. We do not need to be in the shadow of quantitative assessment. Rather, we can affirm the interconnectedness of the skills for working with qualitative and quantitative data. It's important to contextualize that their work is not isolated from the history of their discipline. Next slide. So in starting to plan this after we were able to focus our attention on those several points of interest to us, we realized we had to challenge our own perceptions while honoring what we know to be important about our work. We discussed alternative ways to bring collections to students who may not otherwise have a reason to come to the reading room, or in some cases, the library in general. And we considered two faculty and colleagues who we knew who had a diversity of interests, not specifically limited to or tied to their area of study or their courses, who might have an interest in supporting unique opportunities for students. We looked inward and found interest and support for the idea from the ASU STEM librarian, as well as instruction librarians for undergraduate and graduate students. These connections were important to make because the reach of your colleagues can go a lot farther than your own cold calls or emails, or even your anxious reluctance to reach out in the first place, which I am absolutely guilty of. But it is important, and that's why your colleague networks can be really great assets. And when that connection is made, it's time to brush off and update your elevator pitch. I know you're probably rolling your eyes, but it's a necessary evil. If we've learned anything in the past several months, it's that still no one really understands what we do in the archives, why we do it, and why it's broadly impactful. This is where touching down on overlapping goals and skills can be really effective. Also, having an outline of a plan ready to share will be hugely beneficial to your case. If you can show there is more behind the pitch than theoretical partnership, the more likely you are to be successful. So in creating these experiences, we started by focusing on self-selecting opportunities for students who could opt into the workshop or pop-up with no requirements attached. This seemed to help attract a variety of students, including STEM and social science folks. This was particularly effective in our collaboration with the Honors College. Next slide.
So when we implemented our project, we knew we also had to address not just the initial sales pitch of getting faculty buy-in, but more importantly, we had to capture the attention, keep it, and inspire curiosity. We needed to select items that would appeal to a broad range of interests and experiences. And we also wanted to expose students and faculty to formats that they may have never encountered before, and to engage them with familiar formats in ways that they may have not previously experienced. We also wanted to make sure that we included materials that represented diverse areas of inquiry, including astrology, abolition and anti-slavery, religious persecution, Indigenous rights, among many other topics. A couple of pieces that really engaged students included, and if you see the image on the left of the slide there, that's from Peter Appian's Astronomicum Caesarium, or Imperial Astronomy. It's a work of scientific art with rotating volvals. You can see that in the image there. And it's also essentially an analog computer. You can calculate the distances between stars and planets, as well as birthdays, as well as other things. Another piece that we use that was extremely popular among the students and faculty was an injunction against a large binocular telescope from the Elizabeth Brandt Mount Graham papers at ASU. And this refers to a case when the University of Arizona attempted to build telescopes on Mount Graham, which is a sacred Apache site. There are full references for both of these works in the slides at the end. So we used a consistent approach to fundamental methodologies in the sessions that we did. We facilitated students using visual analysis, oral communication, and cognitive processes. So for example, looking at how events or actions are remembered or interpreted, or how decisions are made. By using a variety of formats, from images, books, maps, correspondence, oral histories, students had the opportunity to apply these methodologies, no matter which discipline they were from. And by engaging them in this manner, we sought for them to develop a skill set, essentially a toolkit that they could take with them. And they didn't have to use this just in that class, just in this particular session, but they could use it in all of their classes, as well as in situations out in the real world. But in order for all of this to work, we had to remove the students' and faculty's hesitations and their fear of doing something that was not familiar to them, or that they might be uncomfortable doing. So we created a welcoming environment for all of them, or at least we tried to. We took steps to break down the traditional barriers that come with the traditional image that many people have about special collections and archives. This is the place that's only for the serious researcher, or it's off limits to everyone. So what we did is we talked about some of our own horrific experiences in reading rooms, being watched constantly, or being grilled about why we were there and why we wanted to use materials. And we also emphasized that the hands-on component of our instruction, really getting the students to touch things that were supposedly off limits, how to handle them properly so that they didn't accidentally cause damage. All of this contributed to helping them build their confidence and get past the fear of, oh, I might damage it. Next slide, please. So now the question is, what did we learn from all of this? Both during the development and implementation phases, and in all honesty, now in our respective new institutions, Occidental College and Stanford University, we recognize that STEM, social sciences, and the humanities are not mutually exclusive. All of us in these disciplines are committed to teaching students how to engage critically with sources and ideas. Even though it may seem that the methodologies used in STEM might be quite different than those used in the humanities or the social sciences, they really aren't so different. The varying approaches actually support one another, and they lead to creative approaches and outcomes. Another important aspect of the approaches we propose is that this is a reciprocal and iterative process. It's not about the teacher imparting knowledge to the student, but about encouraging everyone to learn from one another. The point is to share ideas and foster intellectual curiosity. Our approach also creates an environment in which all participants are able to agree to disagree. This allows us to have discussions and for the critical exchange of ideas. Equally important, archival and special collections instruction doesn't have to be tied to the classroom. In our own experience, this type of instruction generally takes place in the secure special collections classroom, but special collections and archival instruction doesn't have to be confined to that traditional location. It can be adapted and taken on the road, the whole notion of roadshow here, whether it's to an event on campus or another event in the community. Could be even taken out to a local K through 12 school. Special collections instruction can also take place in the form of informal pop-up conversations, or instruction could be done through exhibits and displays. The possibilities really are endless. It's about creativity and a little bit of ingenuity. And although our original intention addressed specific issues at ASU, the partnerships and the type of instruction we are proposing are not tied to any one particular institution. It can be adapted, and we are currently adapting them to new institutions. And we encourage all of you to try it out, be flexible, be creative with it. Yes, you're going to have to try some things. Yes, they're not going to always work, but that's okay. You just modify and you move on, and it's amazing what happens. And take into consideration your context when you undertake planning and collaboration. Finally, the big question, was it worth it? Absolutely. Student response was positive. Even some of their comments appearing in course evaluations was like, oh, that was so great. It was the best thing this semester. So in my book, that's a winner. The students we worked with were engaged, and they were excited about the discoveries they were making in the hands-on sessions. They were even excited about touching paper. That was really cool. The observations they made and the questions they posed demonstrate how they were bringing their disciplinary knowledge from STEM, social sciences, humanities, to examining the items. Then their follow-up questions and comments showed that they were integrating on the spot what others had put on the table in front of them from their own disciplines and experiences. Next slide, please. Now that Claudia and I are in positions at new institutions, we adapted our original project to new context. Our ASU project applies generally to any special collections or university archives, college archives. We think it's important to identify what we already have in place and to build upon it. And we try to engage as many disciplines as possible. Don't let fear of the unknown prevent you from trying something. So for example, Stanford University Archives is working with computer science undergraduates to incorporate machine learning processes in the transcription of handwritten correspondence collections so future researchers can access and utilize the early historical records of the university in novel ways. Special Collections there is using AI for feature recognition to identify aspects of textual layout and decoration. Similarly, here at Occidental College, or OXI for short, Special Collections and College Archives has developed a close working relationship with our biology faculty and undergrads, thanks to our instruction and research librarian for Special Collections, Helena de Lemos. She co-teaches numerous biology classes that are using our early imprint natural histories and scientific works such as Darwin's Origin of Species. And we've also co-hosted events that brought together our rare book collection with bird specimens from OXI's Moore Lab of Zoology. Students use original materials to enhance their studies of plant structure, bird physiology, and the evolution of plants and animals. To further enhance the reach of Special Collections and university archives, we also hire student employees from STEM, social sciences, and the humanities. Our student employees develop professional skills, and they also enhance their own knowledge through assisting with various projects, from processing to digitizing to general reference questions, and a lot more. And equally important, our student employees enrich our knowledge, that is, our staff's knowledge and perspectives. Our student employees also assist in teaching classes and are fostering peer-to-peer learning. This helps us break down the traditional barriers of the teacher-student. Teacher imparts knowledge, which is true, but now the students are doing that. And it also makes for a more welcoming environment for the students to express their ideas with their peers. The stakes appear to be lower. There are no tests, papers, or other types of traditional assessment. So they're a little bit more willing to talk about things and try out ideas. I'm going to pass it back to Claudia now to finish out on this point.
Thank you. So in addition, the multidisciplinary approach brings new perspective to how exhibits are conceived and executed. Opportunities for library staff, students, and faculty to co-curate an exhibit enlarges the scope of exhibits and often results in multidimensional projects that can integrate things such as artificial intelligence, virtual or augmented reality, non-Western viewpoints, and so on. These collaborative exhibits are pushing the boundaries of traditional exhibits and are opening doors for things yet to be tried and offering a pathway for forging new partnerships and experiences in special collections. And finally, the traditional Special Collections and Archives reading room and classroom are welcoming new venue partners. There are many more ways to engage with the campus community and public with any particular repository's collections and staff without putting materials at risk. Bringing an event to from a lecture to an athletic event or a public library or a local elementary school, the possibilities truly are endless, and we're sure you'll have some ideas to share with us about what you have done, and what, give us some things to mull over, especially now, as we mentioned, we're in new situations with colleagues who've developed these relationships, and we are trying to do the same thing in our new context. So we, are looking forward to the conversation. Next slide. So let's talk about it.
Thank you so much, Claudia and Julie. Should we open it up to our Q&A and start seeing what questions folks are bringing in? Sounds good. It looks like we have one question from Sierra Dixon. Can Claudia or Julie speak on other colleagues you're working with and examples of projects that you're doing with them?
Sure. Claudia, do you want to start or?
Sure. So the my direct colleague, the assistant university archivist, and I are going to be working with the newly hired Hobach archivists, and the Hobach collections are specifically about science and technology at Stanford, and we also have a Silicon Valley collection. So we're thinking about ways to kind of connect our responsibility to university history with these, more science-based collections. And we're imagining that this is going to present itself either as an exhibit or bringing our student workers together to do some digitization work, so it can be a digital exhibit. I'm really trying to push for us to do more, I guess pop-up isn't necessarily the word that I mean, but things that aren't tied to any particular class or event, but just being available and using these new colleagues to kind of bring them along in this way of thinking, instead of having to kind of pull back into what curators are doing right now. They're busy too. It's really hard to make these pitches sometimes to people who already have their partnerships and their classes they like to teach and the things they like to use in those classes. So it's exciting to have new colleagues that we can kind of build up this approach with. So that's kind of long-winded, but I'm trying to get some of our new colleagues engaged.
Yeah, and following up on that, what we're doing here at Oxy right now is we're starting new in some respects. I've been here just short of 3 months, and we're in the process of hiring another person. So some of this is still theoretical, but we're reaching out. We're still continuing the partnerships that were already established, that Helena had done a great job reaching out to work with the biology department. We're also working with botany, and we're trying to get people from physics and chemistry also involved in some of our materials. So that's on the list right now. Another, and this is in its earliest discussion, is working with someone in our alumni veterans office about doing something with naval science based upon some of the materials that we have in our archival collections. And this will be a part of a larger outreach effort between special collections and the office there and some of our other partners within the library to develop library services for not only for our veteran students, but also for people who have maybe they're children of veterans and have moved around from base to base growing up, or have served in some of our other staff members who have served in the military that can come in and participate. So we're the earliest phases of trying to bring this in and incorporate aspects of, especially because we have a few people that were in the Navy, to bring some of that science in and looking at how we can promote not only the service of our veterans, but also have them speak about submarine technology and sonar and some of the other records that we're digging up, and then linking this to other items in our collection that aren't necessarily from the ROTC collections or military per se, but are from some of our early scientific works as well, navigation, cartography, so on and so forth. So a lot more to come, but those are at least a couple of examples of some of the things we're doing right now.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie and Claudia. I'm going to go ahead and stop screen share now so we can all kind of feel a little more conversational with each other. And we will be sharing a PDF of the slides afterwards, since there are some resources and links that we want folks to be able to explore. Our next question is from Kelsey. Hello, thank you for the presentation. When you say take the show on the road, do you take original materials or surrogates?
I'll jump in on that one because this is from one of the main examples for this is from when I was at the University of Notre Dame Special Collections, and we actually called it the Special Collections Roadshow. And we went out this is just before COVID shut us down. We went out to a local Montessori school, did 6 sessions there, and we took a surrogate. So we had installed the physical exhibit. It was basically from our early modern natural history collection. So the focus was on animals, birds, things of that nature. We had it was co-curator, myself and our Latin American curator, and we worked with our conservator, and we recreated a modern facsimile edition of what would have been an early modern book. So we took all the images that were on display in the physical exhibit, and then we took more images from the same works, put it together, and our conservator did this amazing job of creating something that looked like a 16th century printed book. It was bound in leather. We were fortunate to be able to have the resources to do this, but it was just the images were digital reproductions. It was bound between wooden boards, then bound in leather. I think we did a half leather binding on that. And then we had an extra clamshell box that we put it in that just happened to be the right size. We put that in, so we took that out, and the students that we work with, they were K through 8, and they were so excited. They thought it was the real thing, and they could put their hands on it. We didn't have to worry about damage to the materials or anything like that. We did have a couple of other books, real items that we took out, but these were copies that were being discarded anyway, and so that way they could feel real paper from, I think what we had, they were probably the early 18th century, so a little bit outside of the time period, but it still gave them an idea of what the materials were, and they could feel the bindings. And we had some scraps from our conservator, examples of vellum and things like that, and they could feel all of that. So it was a combination of two, but no, we didn't take an actual 16th century imprint out with us. That would have raised all kinds of concerns with our administration.
I would caveat that with, there are very likely some things in your collections that are less precious per se than a 16th century book that you could take out without causing, health problems for your conservators. And I think that's something we need to start thinking about as a profession. We will not have everything forever. That's just not possible. And so, being realistic about what the possibilities for an object or record or whatever really is, and making that kind of calculation for what's right for your institution, your repository. But yeah, it doesn't have to be the 16th century book to kind of get some of these points across, and still being able to say, like, this is something that's actually from our collection. Like, we have tons more, come see us.
And this is something right now, orientation week is upon us next week, and the library's doing a couple of tables, and we were thinking about taking out some of our less rare materials, things that hold up a little bit better. We do have graphic novels, and we got a new manga collection in, and these are items that would hold up fairly well to being taken out, granted, as long as it's not raining, which it probably won't rain in Southern California. So, items like that. Sometimes we do have duplicates of other items, or in some cases we have triplicates and quadruplicates. So, be creative. There are items in your collection that could probably travel without any issues, without, risk management coming after you, or your conservator, or your university librarian. So there are a lot of options.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I know in my experience, I always try to do outreach with student groups or with other departments on campus that tend to do their events where students are, right? They go out to like the quad area, they go to like the hub or the bell tower, like those kinds of more public facing spaces. So when they want to work with us, they are kind of asking, can you leave the library? And there's always this hesitation about like, well, we don't know if special collections can, like, if you're restricted or something like that. So I'm glad that we are having more conversations about this in the profession. And I really look forward to kind of exchanging more ideas about that. Because I've absolutely, been told we're doing an outdoor film screening. Can you do like a pop-up exhibit there? So just kind of thinking through what are ways that we can be more responsive, be more inclusive of those perspectives is really important.
Yeah, digital circuits often, sometimes if it is something that you don't want to necessarily take out, a scanned image works just as well, or you can take the electronic version, create a slide deck, and iPads travel well, or we've got all kinds of TVs on carts now, or screens on carts. So there are a lot of different ways of doing this and making the material successful. And then it encourages people because they see it out there. A lot of times you can start the conversation, get them to come into special collections. So
I love that idea, especially if you are like collecting, born digital materials, or maybe I work a lot with student activism materials at our institution. And so I think students, the first thing they think of is like, wow, we don't have flyers anymore like this, like they love seeing this material from the 60s and the 70s. But when they start thinking about what they're producing today, they realize we can't archive it the same way. So it's a really good entryway to have that conversation.
And it's a good way of getting students interested, and then they want to come and work for special collections and archives. And
Yes.
that way you get that type of engagement. It gives them more ownership of the collections here. They're proud of it. They want to come in, then they bring their friends and parents in. So it's outreach too, which is, and just the excitement itself. That's a huge benefit of all of this.
And I would just add on to this that it doesn't have to be hard. I feel like our impulse is to like make things harder on ourselves because we do have these like dueling senses of responsibility. But we don't have to do that. So, it really does boil down to just like making the commitment to try something. Like Julie said during the presentation, like some things aren't going to work, but that's okay. And you don't have to be doing something brand new every month, every semester. Like these things take time to build, and giving yourself the space to slow down and really, conceive of something that you care about, and you'll want to push through the different iterations based on success and feedback, and just kind of being open to it without a lot of, judgment of yourself. I think, that's something that we really, I say we as the profession, I know that I still like struggle with it pretty regularly too. But we have to give ourselves a break. No one else is really going to. So, don't make this something where you're like, oh, I have to do it perfectly or else no one's going to support my ideas. It's like, don't make that the narrative for yourself. And we're here if you need to have that dialogue with someone. That can go a long way instead of sitting with yourself and being like, I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing this right. Whatever the, conversation you're having with yourself is. So give yourself a break.
Awesome. Thank you. Our next question is, did you get the sense that there was more engagement from students or faculty in certain fields than others in this project? For example, maybe more engagement from the STEM field, more from the humanities field?
I got go ahead. Go ahead.
You can go.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that one of our most successful partnerships at ASU was a faculty person in the Honors College who is a mathematician, but has a secret penchant for German philosophy, and was just really excited about some of the rare books that Julie was able to pull out for him. And, because he has his specialization, his personal areas of interest, and works and is a faculty person in the Honors College, which has, he's able to connect with more students with broader interest. So he was able to kind of capture an audience for us that was really diverse. And I think it was a reflection of his own, diversity of interest. So I guess math and philosophy kind of go together, but it really is having those, kind of more personal conversations too, that can kind of get you where you need to go in finding those unusual connections. So that was one kind of successful, unexpected STEM connection.
Yeah, my experience has been that with faculty, it takes a little bit more work to engage people from STEM. To pique their interest usually isn't necessarily the hard part, but to get them to actually come in is harder, and to bring their classes in, that's a lot harder. Whereas with the students, it doesn't seem to matter which discipline they're in. You can get them excited. There's something that will get them excited. And I have, I've worked with probably just as many students from the STEM fields as I have from the humanities fields. It's about just going out there, and sometimes you have to kind of just be a nerd and be excited about something, and then they get excited. And it's amazing. There's that deep down inside, there's that secret hidden interest that they all have, but they're like, well, but of course, this is the common one I always hear. Yeah, but mom and dad want me to become a doctor, or mom and dad want me to become an engineer, but I really like history, or I really like art, or something like that. So usually there is that interest in the students, no matter what their fields are. We have people from humanities, and all of a sudden you find out that they're like, oh yeah, but I'm an English major, but I'm also really interested in physics, or they have these interesting pairings. So I think the students a lot of times are disciplines don't matter, even though they might be a declared major.
If I may interject another kind of related question a little bit on that topic, I was wondering if you could kind of expand a little bit about any tips or thoughts that you have when selecting items. Because for me, I find that it can be tricky for selecting items in fields that I'm not as familiar with, right? So for example, I think the first time I had to kind of go out of my comfort zone in selection was with an astronomy club here. A student astronomy club actually reached out and asked, could you do a tour of special collections for us? Like, we're really interested in seeing what you have. And it was a brand new topic. So of course I did some research, but I'm wondering, how do you kind of navigate that, kind of working with fields that maybe you're less familiar with?
Dive in head first, just try it. My tactic oftentimes is just to sit on the floor and start pulling items off the shelf to see what's there, rather than doing the targeted search. Yes, you have to do both, but I like just that, oh, that has an interesting bind, let me pull that off and see what it is. And that's how I found some of the most interesting items, because if I sit down and use the catalog, I tend to go back to the things I know, which means I miss a lot. So park it on the floor and be creative and see what comes off the shelf.
I would also say just having those conversations with the students or the faculty person that you're talking with, they will reveal things to you that can help direct how you think about what you want to pull. And I think someone in the chat said, yeah, it was Tracy, different items will impact people in different ways. That's just true. It's a fundamental truth. And you can't plan for everyone, but you can do the best that you can with the information you gather for yourself to make these decisions. It's never going to be every possible thing you could pull for this, but just, I just think like having candid conversations really go a long way in doing any of this kind of work that is outside of our regular scope, or things we do all the time. You just have to be willing to say, I don't really know, help me help you. There's nothing wrong with saying I don't know, and it's really powerful, I think, in these kinds of relationships with this is what I can bring, but it'd be really helpful. This is what I bring to the table in this partnership. It would be really helpful for you to kind of meet me halfway so we can make this be something really effective.
Absolutely. Thank you. Our next question is, can you give some examples of groups or events that you went to outside of the traditional classroom to connect with STEM students?
Well, my work so far, a lot of this has been kind of on campus, so more of the traditional classroom type things, groups, faculty. But I've also had conversations with people that are in industry, and these have been somewhat random conversations, just out of the blue. You happen to be somewhere, so oddly enough, I happened to be at a grocery store one time standing in the line and just struck a conversation with the person behind me. And it's like, oh, so what do you do? And so the conversation started there. And it turned out that the person I was speaking with was an engineer and was just kind of curious. So I was like, yeah, talking about the type of work I did. So I kind of veered it toward, oh yeah, working with students and trying to get them in, trying to get more and more students in from engineering, because we have this really cool pop-up book. Well, it's sort of a pop-up book. It's an artist book as well, designed by Julie Chen. And I'm like, it's this massive thing, and there's all these different aspects, and you can talk about the environment and so on and so forth. But it's just when it comes down to it, like, it'd be cool to have engineering students come in because it's paper engineering. You're talking about structure here. And he kind of looked at me and he's like, oh, I would have never thought about that. So not that this ever went anywhere from that particular conversation, but that was, you could be anywhere and you can start striking up these conversations. Airplanes are good places too. I've had very bizarre conversations about special collections and possibilities on airplanes with whoever's sitting, to your right or left.
And
Yeah.
I would say that Julie and I have had conversations too about what this can look like, because again, we spent a lot of time building this framework for a context where neither of us are anymore. So it's hard to kind of like really shift your perspective, because we are in places now where this isn't a gap we need to fill. It's an effort we are supporting. So, we're not having to, build the foundation for this on our own. It already exists. And that does change the way you think about how to participate in new ways. Because again, people have been doing this, and you don't want to come in and be like, I have this idea and I'm the only one who's ever had it. Right. So it's that fine line too of having conversations about like what would actually be supporting the work that's already going on with your other colleagues. But with that to say, Julie and I have talked about things, like if there are Halloween events around the campus community, that could be an interesting way to get some of our weirder stuff, which I think tends to be our less, documenty type objects out to the public, and that is a really great opportunity, I think, to have it be part of the community, not attached to, an assignment, but something where students will be, faculty will be, community members will be, and that is just a really, I think, a fun point to starting conversations with everyone, like the whole spectrum, right? Like K through 12. We want kindergartners to be like, that's so weird. Where can I go to see this? It can really be that simple. And so that's something that I'm thinking about after our conversation about that. That's something I'm thinking about, how we can maybe make our presence known for something a little unexpected or unusual.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And also because our locations have changed and we're at institutions where we're not fighting to do this, that the infrastructure is kind of here already, and we can build upon it and expand it. And we're also in areas where there are more partners surrounding us. I mean, Southern California is even more richly populated with museums, colleges, universities, archives than where Stanford is, but there's quite, you've got a good base up in Northern Cal too. We're looking to reach out to all of you, hopefully, and talk about some partnerships where we can link our collections together, in terms of usage, come up with co-sponsored events, get out into the community at some, mutually agreed upon location and start working together. Because the thing is, it's one thing when it's one college doing this or one university doing that, but if it's all of us putting our efforts together and it becomes kind of a normal part and we're out there in the community, you're going to have people that are starting to realize that this isn't like the preserve of one place. This is just, it's out there. This is cool. This is what we can do. And I think that even increases access. It breaks down more of the traditional barriers and opens up the door for a lot more collaboration, discussion with community partners. Historical societies. We're working out here with the Eagle Rock Historical Society and doing some, collaborative work with them, the United American Indian Initiative as well. And I was like, well, here's the starting point, but how can we extend this? What other types of events can we host or help you host? Because it's not always about us. It's not necessarily about bringing the thing here. But how can we support you? And I think that's equally important right now. And then you can get students involved too. So that's always the fun part. And, for me in special collections, I didn't come to special collections until the second semester of my second graduate program. So yeah, I'm embarrassed. But at least I eventually came to it, right? Someone finally introduced me to it. And so I feel it's part of my mission to make sure everyone knows about this. I don't want a senior walking in saying, oh, wish I would have known about this earlier. I want you to know about this from the first day you set foot on campus, if not before. As a matter of fact, I want, the 3-year-old to know about special collections, and it's possible. So there's just so many different approaches. Oh, I see someone else didn't know about special collections until graduate school too. Join the club, Sandy.
My coworker. So when I started at Stanford, she was like, yeah, I'd never been to an archive until I went to graduate school. And I have known I wanted to be an archivist since I was like 16. So it still is a shock to me. I mean, I know I'm weird. I'm the weird one in this scenario, but I still am like, what? How? But I mean, it's real, and it is a space. It's an easy space for us to say, like, it's okay that you've never been here before. We are ready to welcome you whenever you find us. But like Julie's saying, helping to bridge that gap of like showing up where people are, and meeting them at the level they're at, instead of having it be this like highly academic environment or requirement, I think is really, really going to be the thing that lets us keep the profession interesting and engaging and allow people to, do exactly this, like find us when they're ready to find us.
I'm going to throw something else out there. This has nothing to do with what we were just talking about, but someone asked earlier about like other partnerships and whatnot with STEM. Something else that I've been involved in was we sent out sample from our collections. We had both a numismatic collection and a medieval manuscript collection, and we were working with the astrophysicists on campus, and they were doing data analysis, or they were doing analysis of the inks to try to date some of the materials, more accurately date some of the materials, and so on and so forth. So these are other types of partnerships that you can work with STEMs. So it may not necessarily be the teaching aspect initially, and you can be turned into that. But these are other types of ways for special collections and archives to collaborate with STEM. So just throwing that out, if anyone is, has interesting materials in their collections, that these are other possibilities of forging relationships with STEM. And then maybe from that, you can also get them to bring their classes in too. So
Thank you so much. I know we have one last question and we're right on the edge of our time. But Shelby wanted to ask, was there any restraint found from any group towards the interdisciplinary concept?
I can't say that I recall anyone opposing it, especially right now. There's so much emphasis on interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, hyphenate the disciplinary ways of teaching and engagement. So for the most part, it was receptive in all of the experiences that I had.
What is really interesting to me is that we came from an environment where the pushback we got was internal to the library and specifically archives. And I can't really explain that. It was confusing then and it's confusing now. But that is just something to think about. You may not get pushback from the places you think you will. So that's not to say like be scared of your colleagues. Don't be scared of your colleagues, but you know, just new things, new ideas, changes can be really upsetting to people. And that's just the way people are. So that's something to keep in mind as you start trying to broach these conversations, especially if you're a library that's resource strapped, time strapped, whatever the case may be. You know,
yeah,
just
you have
be
to kind of feel
prepared.
the waters and, you know, find the people initially, you know, as you're starting work like this, find the people who seem like they're excited and willing to work with you and run with that. And if you sense that a person's kind of skeptical or whatever, don't push it. And if you start working and they, you know, set the example, right, and they start seeing things like, oh, that's interesting, you might be able to pull them in that way. But yeah, test the waters out.
Thank you so much to both of you, to Claudia, to Julie, for this incredible presentation, discussion. I learned a lot. I feel like we could discuss this forever because it's so fascinating and such an important conversation to have today in our profession. So I want to thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all of our attendees. My colleague Adrian also dropped a link in the chat for our next event. Please keep an eye out for that. We will be talking about hacking the academic interview. So if you're interested about, you know, learning about the interview process for academic institutions, please join us for that. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. We're happy to send out the slide deck as well, because there's 2 more slides at the end that have contact information and resources. So we're more than happy to share that. And if anyone has questions, please do feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to continue conversations. And thank you so much for your time today.
Yes, thank you so much. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
I wanted to stay on to debrief